I always thought grief would feel like drowning, not like burning alive from the inside out. My name is Emily Carter, 31 years old, primary school teacher living in a modest flat in Croydon. 11 months ago, I buried an empty casket. After the Royal Navy informed me that my husband, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Carter, had been lost when his frigate sank off the Cornish coast. I carried on in a fog, teaching my Year 3 students by day and staring at walls by night. My sister Claire checked on me with clockwork precision every Sunday, her sharp eyes cataloging my slow decline over shepherd pie and forced conversation. I existed rather than lived, convinced the best parts of me had sunk into the cold Atlantic alongside Daniel. The Monday it happened was gray and formless, like all the Mondays before. I stood swaying on the Piccadilly line, mentally rehearsing a lesson on long division when a ghost stepped into my carriage at Green Park. My heart stopped mid-beat. There across the crowded train stood Daniel, my supposedly dead husband, very much alive. His chestnut hair was cut differently, shorter at the sides than he used to wear it. His once laughing eyes darted with practiced caution over the other passengers. He wore clothes I had never seen, a severe charcoal overcoat that made him look like a stranger. But I would know the line of his jaw anywhere, the particular way he carried tension in his shoulders. 11 months of grief crystallized into a single perfect moment of clarity. Daniel was alive. Our eyes never met. While shock froze me against the handrail, Daniel exited at King Cross Station, moving with deliberate casualness toward the northern exit. The doors began to close before I snapped to my senses. I squeezed through just as they sealed behind me, abandoning my lesson plans and marking in my shoulder bag. The lunchtime crowd swallowed him at intervals, his height the only thing keeping him in my view. I followed at a distance, heart hammering against my ribs like it might escape my chest entirely. He walked with purpose, checking his reflection in shop windows to scan behind him. I ducked behind commuters whenever he looked back. Daniel led me past the busy station and through the redeveloped plaza of Granary Square. He veered away from the trendy restaurants and university buildings toward an area of partial construction, finally disappearing into a derelict warehouse with boarded windows and fading hazard signs. I hesitated at the corner, counting silently to 60 before creeping closer. A gap between warped plywood sheets offered a narrow view inside. The warehouse floor was largely empty except for a makeshift meeting area illuminated by portable work lights. Daniel stood with his back to me, passing a hard-shelled flight case to a man whose face was marked by a jagged scar running from eye to jaw. Money changed hands. Thick bundles of pounds that the scarred man counted twice before passing Daniel a thin package. I strained to hear their words, catching only fragments about timetables and secure transit. When the man called Daniel by a name I did not recognize, bile rose in my throat. I am not one for hysterics. Never have been. The daughter of a career Army officer, I was raised on practicality and planning. So when my dead husband accepted a new passport from a criminal in an abandoned building, I did not scream or faint. I memorized the scarred man face and the name he used, Baxter. I waited until both men left through separate exits, and I followed Daniel to a small hotel near Euston, where he checked in under his new identity. Then I went home to my empty flat, poured a glass of wine I did not drink, and began making lists. The truth is a dangerous thing when improperly handled. I needed more information before confronting the husband who chose to die rather than confide in me. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to fake a naval disaster. The questions piled like bodies. Why would Daniel abandon our life together? What was in the case that commanded such money? Who else knew he walked among the living? I spent that night staring at our wedding photograph, trying to recognize the man I had followed. Sleep came in fragments, and when it did, I dreamed of drowning men with Daniel face who reached for me as dark water pulled them down. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 11 months. I combed through every paper and digital record I had of Daniel's career. His service files had been sealed after his presumed death, standard procedure according to the letter of condolence, but Daniel had always been methodical to a fault. Before his last deployment, he had updated our shared passwords document in the fire safe, including his military email login. the first crack in whatever conspiracy had stolen my husband. Most of his emails were mundane, logistics and duty rosters. But his final week contained references to a special escort mission, transporting classified weapons slated for decommission. The messages were formal, carefully worded, but reading between the lines revealed Daniel unease. One communication with a superior officer contained a veiled question about documentation discrepancies that received a terse reply ordering him to follow protocol. 11 days later, his ship supposedly sank with all hands. The coincidence felt as subtle as a gunshot. I needed someone who had served with Daniel, someone who might have suspected something was wrong. In the memorial service guest book, I found Petty Officer Amar Singh, who had sent me a handwritten note about serving under my husband's command. I tracked down his address to a flat in Southampton and drove there the same afternoon. The man who answered my knock looked nothing like his service photo, gaunt now with haunted eyes. When I mentioned Daniel's name, his dark face went several shades paler. Singh invited me inside but remained standing, as if prepared to flee. I told him I needed to understand what had happened to the ship, to my husband. I told him I was not afraid of difficult truths. He studied me for a long minute before pulling out a chart from a locked drawer, spreading it across his kitchen table. It showed the English Channel with several coves marked in red along the Cornwall coastline. Singh said the official route had been altered the night before departure. He said Daniel had logged his concerns but been overruled. The mission had seemed wrong from the outset, with unusual security protocols and unmarked cargo. As Singh spoke, his hands trembled. He told me to leave ghosts buried, that some questions invited dangerous answers. When I pressed further, mentioned Baxter name, Singh grabbed the chart and set it aflame in his kitchen sink. He escorted me out, whispering that he was sorry, truly sorry, but he had already said too much. His final words as he closed the door were to check the manifest against the official inventory. The difference would tell its own story. I drove home with my mind churning through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. The pieces were starting to align into a picture I could barely comprehend, one where my husband had discovered something worth faking his death to investigate. Or to escape. I entered my flat past midnight, exhausted and overwrought. It took 3 steps inside to realize something was wrong. The air smelled different. Drawers stood partially open. Picture frames sat at subtly wrong angles. Someone had searched my home with professional precision, the kind meant to go unnoticed. But they had left one deliberate sign. On my kitchen table lay our wedding photograph, the glass frame intact but the photo inside slashed with a blade, separating Daniel's smiling face from mine. The message needed no translation. They knew I was looking. They were watching. And they wanted me to stop. I slept at Claire Flat that night, telling her nothing beyond a fictional break-in. My sister worked as a paralegal for a major London firm and had a spare room perpetually made up. When she left for work the next morning, I used her computer to dig deeper, searching news archives around the time of the supposed sinking. There was remarkably little coverage beyond the initial announcements, no follow-up investigations, no recovery efforts documented. As if the story had been carefully managed from the start. My next move was riskier. I needed to find Baxter, the scarred man who had traded with Daniel. Using Claire's extensive legal databases, I searched for criminal records matching his description. Nothing. But a search of business registries turned up a connection. An antique shop in Camden Town registered to a holding company whose director had the same unusual first name Singh had mentioned in passing. Baxley Thornton Estates, managed by a Theodore Baxley. Baxter. I spent 3 days watching the shop from a cafe across the street. The antiques were beautiful, high-end pieces with discreet price tags. The clientele was equally exclusive. On the second day, Daniel arrived shortly after lunch, carrying nothing but leaving with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. On the third day, I gathered my courage and entered the shop myself while Baxter was alone. I browsed porcelain figurines while straining to hear his phone conversation in the back room. The words carried clearly. A covert transfer of something called the package. Foreign clients. A chartered trawler departing from Whitstable. The date was set for the coming weekend. Whatever Daniel had stolen or discovered was about to leave the country. I was running out of time to understand what had driven my husband to such extremes. Why he had chosen to let me mourn him rather than trust me with the truth. The pain of that betrayal burned hotter than my fear. As I left the shop, Baxter watched me with narrowed eyes. I smiled pleasantly and thanked him for his time. His gaze followed me all the way across the street. Claire noticed my distraction at our Sunday dinner. My sister had always read me like one of her legal briefs, with annoying accuracy. When I picked at my food and jumped at small noises, she set down her fork and demanded the truth. The whole truth. I hesitated, knowing that sharing put her at risk, but I needed an ally with resources beyond my reach. I told her everything. Daniel sighting, the warehouse exchange, Singh warning, my ransacked flat, the conversation at the antique shop. Claire listened without interruption, her expression growing grimmer by the minute. When I finished, she was already reaching for her phone. Her firm handled sensitive government contracts, and she had cultivated relationships with officials across departments. She made 3 calls, speaking in the clipped professional tones she reserved for emergencies. By the time she hung up, she had secured a meeting with a contact in naval intelligence for the following morning. The commander who met us was wary but attentive. He took my statement, cross-checking details against files he would not show us. His questions focused oddly on the contents of the flight case and any numbers or codes I might have overheard. When I mentioned the trawler from Whitstable, he abruptly ended the interview. As we were escorted out, Claire slipped away to speak with another officer she recognized. She returned with a troubled expression, but said nothing until we were blocks away from the building. What Claire had learned changed everything. Through a leaked briefing, she had discovered Daniel had not died by accident or misadventure. He had deliberately disappeared after uncovering evidence of an illegal arms laundering ring operated by senior naval officers. They were diverting weapons scheduled for decommission to overseas buyers, documenting their destruction while pocketing millions. Daniel had stolen proof from within the conspiracy, but needed to vanish to shield me from reprisals while he built an airtight case. He had never intended to stay dead, only to keep me safe until the truth could emerge without endangering us both. I spent that night at Claire again, neither of us willing to separate with such knowledge between us. We debated contacting trusted journalists or parliamentary oversight committees. In the morning, Claire left for work while I researched secure communication channels. When she failed to answer my midday texts, concern blossomed into dread. I tried her office. They had not seen her. I called her friends, her gym, even her favorite lunch spots. Nothing. At 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang with her number. The voice that spoke was male, coldly professional. He told me Claire was unharmed, for now. She had been intercepted outside our childhood home in Guilford, where she had gone to retrieve documents from the family safe. If I wanted to see my sister alive again, I would bring the evidence Daniel had stolen to a decommissioned dry dock in Portsmouth Harbor at midnight. I would come alone, or Claire would suffer the consequences. The call ended before I could respond. I sat paralyzed, the phone clutched in my hand. I had no evidence. Whatever Daniel had taken, he had not shared it with me. I had one chance to save my sister, but I did not hold the bargaining chip they believed I possessed. Unless. The coincidence of Claire's abduction after our naval intelligence meeting was too precise. They must have been watching us, listening. They thought Daniel had passed the evidence to me during our encounter on the underground. The flight case. The small parcel from the antique shop. One of them must contain what they wanted so desperately to recover. With no other options, I drove to the hotel where I had followed Daniel. The clerk at reception did not recall the guest. The room had been paid for the entire week in cash, but no one had returned after the first night. Another dead end. Desperate, I retraced our movements from that first day. The underground. King Cross. Granary Square. The warehouse. It was there, searching the abandoned building as sunset stained the broken windows, that I found it. A loose floorboard beneath which sat a waterproof case containing a single encrypted USB drive and a letter addressed to me. The letter was brief, written in the precise handwriting I had received on birthdays and anniversaries for 9 years of marriage. It explained everything: the phantom weapons shipments, the falsified destruction records, the admiral who had threatened Daniel when questions arose. Most importantly, it held the key to the encryption. A phrase from our wedding vows, words only we would know. That my husband had held onto this personal touchstone through his deception felt like both betrayal and redemption. The letter ended with 3 words that broke what remained of my heart. I never stopped. I drove to Portsmouth with my father. Old service pistol in the glove compartment, a relic from his army days that Claire and I had never surrendered after his death. The USB drive sat heavy in my pocket, knowledge I had not accessed but would trade for my sister life. The dry dock loomed against the night sky, a concrete tomb for ghost ships. I parked at the designated coordinates and walked the final quarter mile, scanning for surveillance or ambush points. The military daughter in me cataloged escape routes and cover positions. The frightened sister in me prayed I was not too late. They waited at the center of the empty dock, 5 figures illuminated by portable floodlights. Claire knelt on the concrete, hands bound before her. A man I recognized as Baxter stood behind her with one hand resting casually on her shoulder. 2 men in civilian clothes but with military bearing flanked them, weapons visible beneath their jackets. And there, restrained between them, was Daniel. My husband's face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. They had clearly been interrogating him without success. The final figure stepped forward as I approached, an older man with commander insignia visible beneath his open coat. He introduced himself as Commodore Huxley, though I already knew his name from Daniel's letter. The Commodore spoke with practiced authority, the voice of a man accustomed to obedience. He told me this unfortunate business could end tonight, that mistakes had been made on all sides, that careers and lives hung in the balance. He wanted only the evidence that Daniel had stolen, and in exchange, my sister and I would be free to leave. Daniel's fate, he implied, had already been decided. His men had found the empty hiding place at the warehouse and knew I must have recovered the drive. All that remained was the simple transaction of information for lives. I studied the tableau before me, stalling for time. Claire's eyes were clear and focused, despite her fear. She gave me the slightest nod, our childhood signal that she was unharmed. Daniel watched me with a complex emotion I could not fully decipher. Was it regret, desperation, or hope that I had somehow divined his contingency plan? I needed to control the situation long enough for that plan to unfold, whatever it might be. The Commodore's patience was thinning. He demanded the drive immediately. I responded that I had insurance measures in place, that the contents of the drive had been encrypted and uploaded to cloud servers programmed to release to major news outlets, if I did not enter a passcode every 12 hours. It was a bluff born of countless spy films, but delivered with the steady conviction of a woman with nothing left to lose. Huxley's face tightened. Daniel gave me the ghost of a smile through bloody lips. What happened next occurred with cinematic simultaneity. Naval police sirens rose in the distance, growing louder with each second. Huxley's men exchanged uncertain glances. Daniel's body tensed like a sprinter before the gun. Claire shifted her weight subtly backward. I reached for the pistol concealed at the small of my back, not to fire, but to create chaos. In that heartbeat of hesitation, Daniel slammed his head backward into the face of the man restraining him. Claire rolled away from Baxter, grasping hands. I fired a single warning shot that echoed like thunder through the concrete chamber. Confusion erupted as naval police vehicles screeched to a halt at the dock entrance, flashing lights painting the scene in strobing blue. Daniel shouted for us to run toward the water. We sprinted across slick steel plating, bullets pinging off metal around us. The edge of the dry dock loomed 15 feet above the dark harbor waters. Without hesitation, we leapt together into the crushing cold below. As we surfaced, gasping, an inflatable boat appeared from the shadows. Petty Officer Singh reached down to pull us aboard, his earlier fear replaced with grim determination. He gunned the engine toward open water where running lights marked a waiting RAF rescue craft. By dawn, Commodore Huxley's arrest was headline news across Britain. Naval police acting on anonymous intelligence had seized records proving the weapons diversion scheme. The stolen arms were recovered from a warehouse near Whitstable before they could be transferred to the waiting trawler. The Ministry of Defense issued carefully worded statements that rewrote the official history of the past year. Special commendations were privately awarded, pensions were quietly restored, and 3 people who had nearly lost everything to institutional corruption began the delicate process of rebuilding their lives. Daniel's arm around my shoulders feels both familiar and new as we sit on the balcony of our safe house in Scotland. Claire visits weekly, her sharp legal mind now dedicated to reforming military accountability systems. My husband speaks softly, of the month spent gathering evidence, of the agony of watching me from afar, believing my pain was necessary to protect me. I tell him that secrets are burdens best carried together, that trust is the foundation upon which everything else must stand. We are different people now, shaped by betrayal and vindication in equal measure. The healing comes slowly, in small moments rather than grand gestures. The greatest lesson I carry forward is that institutions are only as honorable as the people who serve them. That marriage, like government, requires constant vigilance and renewal of first principles. Daniel and I build our second chance on complete transparency. No secrets, no matter how painful the truth. Claire has found renewed purpose in her work, ensuring other families never face what we endured. And I have discovered reserves of strength I never knew I possessed, a capacity for calculated action when principles demand it. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome is my new appreciation for the thin line between justice and revenge. I did not set out to destroy careers or topple command structures. I simply wanted my husband back, my sister safe, and the truth acknowledged. That these objectives aligned with the greater good feels like grace I scarcely deserve. The quest, that began with a ghost on the underground, ended with a system forced toward accountability. Not perfect justice, but progress nonetheless. Have you ever discovered a betrayal so profound it forced you to question everything you thought you knew about your life? How did you rebuild from those ashes?